Hi, everybody. I'm Audrey Moore with Audrey Helps Actors Podcast, and this is episode number 81. Having some fun in your acting career, getting ready for Self-Tape May 2022. Pew, 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 pew. I'm pretty jazzed about Self-Tape May, you guys. I'm getting emails from New Zealand. What's up, New Zealand? Participating in Self-Tape May this year. So excited, you guys. Self-Tape May is going to be ginormous. The momentum is already here, so I can't wait for it to get going. I'm also super excited about today's episode with Lola Blanc. Lola Blanc is, you guys, Lola is incredible. She's just everything that's incredible. She is a co-host of the Trust Me podcast, which is all about cults and cult surviving and cult mentality. She is herself a cult and sex trafficking survivor. We talk a lot about the similarities between the entertainment industry and cults, which is just like, oh my gosh, I don't know about you, but during the pandemic, I watched so many cult documentaries and it hit a little too close to home. I'm not gonna lie. So I found out about this podcast, the Trust Me podcast, through our incredible former guest and incredibly funny human being, the one, the only Avital Ash. Do you say Ash? Avital Ash?
I don't really know.
Avital Ash or Ash? We're gonna find out, and we're gonna let you guys know.
Everybody go follow Avital because she's the funniest person that I follow.
Really, go follow Avital. We love you, girl.
Not that she needs our follow.
She doesn't. She's so much cooler than we are. Okay, so Lola Blanc is super besties with Avital, and I found them looking so cute on their Instagram posts. And then I learned about the podcast, and then I totally was like, hey, come on the podcast. So I'm super excited. We talk a lot about the lab rat experiment and science. Oh my gosh, don't you want to find out what that is? And the difference between passion and fanaticism, which goodness, I mean, I don't know about you. I need a solid dose about the difference between passion and fanaticism. This is my husband's note. He said, you say, this reminds me of every acting class I've ever been in, like a troubling amount of times this episode. So clearly our acting classes, they're kind of like cults. And that should be a surprise to absolutely no one who's been in acting class. All right, we've got one more month until Self-Tape May. What should you be doing in April? Please start finding your sides, start finding your group, your accountability buddies, your Self-Tape May collaborators, and get it ready. Ask others if they're doing it. See if you can just get as many people to help as many of you as possible. I'm super excited. Also, this is just a little something that I think would be really cool. Anybody watch The Witcher? I do, and it's just so good. I mean, Henry is having the most fun. So, this season, I just want to throw out, if anybody's like, gosh, I just want to revive my spirit, and then they just did tapes from The Witcher. If somebody wants to get those contacts that are like, oh my God, I just drank the little bottle of juice and now I'm in hyper beast mode as The Witcher, that just really warms my heart. So there you go. I don't know who you are out there that's going to do it, but I believe in one of you. I believe one of you is going to do all 16 tapes from The Witcher, and something's going to happen that's going to be special. I don't know what yet, but I'm putting it out there. The Witcher, you guys. Okay, listen, here's the thing. Please leave us a review on iTunes. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I was a little sad this week. This week I didn't get any iTunes reviews. And the feeling of sadness that I got from not getting iTunes reviews was like, this is going to get really dark. It was like getting a phone call that your child was stuck in a well and they're unable to be saved. It felt that tragic. So here's what would be amazing is if instead this next week, whatever you're doing right now while you're listening to this episode, you were like, I'm going to dry my hands if I'm doing the dishes. I'm going to put down the laundry. I'm going to take a second to put the weights down, get off of this treadmill. I'm just going to go on to Apple Podcasts, and I'm going to go on to Audrey Helps Actors Podcast. I'm going to go on to the part where it says leave a review, and I'm just going to leave a little review for her because it just makes her so happy. That would really be so great of you if any of you did that. So thanks in advance. This episode is sponsored by Jeff Pride at Self Tapes Here. That's Jeff Pride at Self Tapes Here on Instagram. I posted one of his booking self tapes. Congrats, Jeff. Carla Zuniga on Instagram at Carla Zuniga Hair. That's Carla Zuniga for all your fabulous haircut needs. And Greg Saffel at singinglessonslosangeles.com. That's Greg Saffel at singinglessonslosangeles.com. All right. I hope you're setting up a self-tape for practice or an audition, but I hope it's an audition. I hope it's a callback. I hope you're setting up a redirection. Hey, we got a note for you. Can you retape this one scene? Because they really like you. They just want to see if you could do this other note this other way. That's what I hope for you. All right, book it.
Audrey helps actors because they don't know anything.
Hi, everybody. I'm Audrey Moore with Audrey Helps Actors Podcast. And today we have
Lola Blanc.
Hi, Lola.
Hi.
How are you?
I am fine. How are you?
I'm also fine. I like it. I like the honesty. This episode I'm going to title, Is Your Acting Class a Cult?
Good title.
Thanks. Because I have been in very culty acting classes. And like many people during the pandemic, I'd say over the last several years, I've become more and more attuned to cult mentality, high control groups, manipulation tactics, things like that. And every time I ingest a lot of information about cults, I'm automatically sort of crestfallen by how much that reminds me of Hollywood.
Oh my gosh.
So tell everyone a little bit about your podcast and a little bit about your own experience in cults.
Yeah. So my podcast is called Trust Me, Cults, Extreme Belief, and the Abuse of Power. My co-host and I actually both have culty experiences in our background, and we interview fellow former cult members or extreme believers or experts. The experience that I had, sort of a unique one, because it wasn't like a full-on group. It was kind of like a mini cult. But basically, there was a man who preyed upon my mother's beliefs when I was a kid. And he, over time, and it's a longer, complicated story, but basically convinced her that he was the new prophet of God. And basically, I was snooping around my mom's stuff and I found his letters to her. And so then I believed in him too. And then I was kind of a part of this whole thing. So now he has this whole group. He's like a full-on, the nature of the group changes all the time. Now I think he calls himself a political party. But at the time, he separated me from my mom. He sex trafficked my mom. And we were able to get out of it when somebody who sort of knew the scam that he was running, like, broke down and cried and essentially rescued us, which is not, it's never like the ending of the story that I want to tell. I want it to be like, and then we, noted the red flags ourselves and figured it out and we're strong, but a man saved us. That's what happened.
Well, but that, getting out of a cult, usually, that's not uncommon, right? That somebody has to sort of get somebody in a cult to see the forest from the trees.
Well, it's interesting. I'm always surprised by how many of the guests we have on our show really just like started noticing things themselves. Because what happens a lot is that when somebody is like attacking your belief system, when you're so indoctrinated in something, that just generally doesn't work. So the majority of the stories that I hear, I would say, honestly, are just people noticing this inconsistency and noticing that abusive thing and noticing that they're feeling bad all the time. And they're still connected to people on the outside. And they're like, why don't I get to talk to them anymore? That kind of thing. It's interesting.
Yeah, I love all of that. So you're a musician and an actress. And I had mentioned to you about my experiences in Hollywood and really looking at show business as this sort of cult. And you had said that you see a lot of those similarities in the music industry. So I'd love to sort of talk about what are some things that you're seeing in the music industry that are also maybe just part of show business in general that maybe, first of all, makes us susceptible to manipulation, to high control environments, things like that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we live in an industry, all of the industries I'm in, there's so much uncertainty. There isn't a direct path to success as much as we all desperately want to believe that there is. And I think when you're living in such extreme levels of uncertainty, when somebody comes along and says, here's some certainty that I have for you, that is so appealing. And they say, like, people who are the most susceptible to cults are the ones who've recently been through some kind of dramatic life change or transition, whether they're fresh out of college or there's a divorce or they're experiencing grief, that kind of thing. But I feel like in our industry, it's just a constant whirlwind of uncertainty. We're artists, we're looking for answers, we're trying to figure it out. And like anything that comes along that just makes us feel like there's just something to hold on to, something more concrete, I think that really makes us more susceptible.
Yeah, it reminds me of a couple of things that I sort of had learned about over the last year. One is this lab rat experiment where they have two different lab rat groups. And in one box, every time the rat pulls the lever, the rat gets a pellet. And that rat is just like completely chill and just knows that like when they're hungry, they're going to pull the lever and they're going to get a pellet. The other rat, it's randomized. Then the rat becomes completely obsessed with the lever and tries all these different things to sort of solve whatever the thing is that is the solution that's going to make the pellet come down and give them some food.
Right.
And that was sort of sad because then I realized like, oh, right. Show business and just the randomization of it and how that leads us to be so susceptible to finding the answers. Right. And I love that your podcast is called Trust Me, because it is that thing. It's that like, we want somebody to tell us, how do we make it in an industry that has a 97% unemployment rating? Tell me how I can thread the needle and be part of that 3%.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who seek out artistry and things like that are people who come from traumatic childhoods, childhoods where they're seeking approval. And I remember one therapist said, it's ironic that you were all neglected as children. So you've sought out a profession that's going to reject you for the rest of your life. And I was thinking like, yeah, no, that's too bad. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about the most recent episode that you have out about tyrants. And one of the things that I thought was so cool about that episode was he pointed out cult leaders, tyrants, they actually bring us the solutions. Right. That they're really good at being like, here's the solution to the thing. And it's in that people then feel beholden to this person and beholden to this following. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the things I like to stress the most, because I think when we consume cult media, it can be very sensationalized and it goes straight to like, and then they took the Kool-Aid and whatever. And we're like, what idiots, I can't believe they did that. But the truth is that every single cult, like in the cult world, the phrase is nobody joins a cult, right? Like they join a group that is offering them something, whether it's community, self-help or growth, or feeling like they're getting their career together, which is what Nexium was all about, And if there weren't actual value there, nobody would join. Jim Jones, I always give this example, Jim Jones of Jonestown fame. The People's Temple was like this church that was offering a space that was anti-racist and promoted equality in a way that other churches weren't doing at that time. Like there's always something there that is working and that has something right. And it's only over time, again, this is the most common metaphor people use, but like a frog in the pot of slowly boiling water, it's only over time that you realize, oh, it's pretty hot in here and maybe I should get out. And at that point, you're so deep in, that's when it's difficult.
And I think that really describes for so many people their relationship with show business in general. My first 5 episodes of this podcast are about quitting or about letting go of the actor profession. And I talk with a lot of people who've left and come back, people who've just left and stayed gone, all those sorts of things, because there is this cult-like mentality of exactly what you're saying of like, well, then you went to college and then you spent, 70 grand a year on student loans to be an actor. And then what are you going to do with that choice? And then you get here and then you start being in acting classes. And now you're in your late 20s and suddenly you're an actor, and maybe the lifestyle of an actor isn't actually what you want your life to be as a grown adult person.
Right.
And in that a lot of other professions, when you say to yourself, you know what, I think I don't want to be a teacher. I want to pursue this other path. You don't get like a lot of that pushback of like, but your dreams and you're a quitter and right. And in acting and in art, often to quit has this sense of shame on it. Like you couldn't hack it. You couldn't make it. And I always try to say that loving acting versus loving the lifestyle of being a working actor are two different things.
Totally.
And it is that pot slowly, frog being slowly dipped in the pot, that before you know it, you're 10 years in, $100,000 in debt, and then what are you going to do?
Yeah. I mean, it's the sunk cost fallacy, right? The more you invest in something, the harder it is to stop investing in it, no matter whether it is working or making you happy or not. I relate to this so hard because I sort of had a moment like that with my music. I decided that I wanted to be a pop star when I was 9 years old and moved to LA at 17. I'm now 33. And, I hit a point a few years ago where I was like, I think I'm miserable. I'm pretty sure I'm miserable. But I was clinging to this idea that I had as a kid that this was going to be the thing that would make me lovable, that would give me the validation that I wanted, that would prove to everyone who didn't believe in me that I was something. And it was so hard to look at that honestly and be like, do I really want to be like in my 30s and like doing this hustle that is soul sucking, where I have to act like everything's great all the time and like get dressed up all the time? I do have more music coming out, but what I did was I took a break. And it ended up making music that much more fulfilling because I'm no longer grasping onto it with this like sense of desperation. And it's more like, no, this is a thing that I'm doing because I love it. And this is how I express myself. But it doesn't mean that I'm a failure if I do not have a number one single by the time I'm whatever other arbitrary age I decide on,
Absolutely. I mean, some of my friends in my 20s, I remember I had some friends who were actors and I had some friends who were non-actors. And I remember having like a gathering once together, and some of my non-actor friends were sort of saying how some of the actors, not a lot of them, but a couple of them, were kind of being jerks. And I remember thinking that was weird because that's not how I knew them to be. And I remember it dawning on me about this choice that we make so often as artists, that I think we can get like this superiority syndrome of like, well, we're artists, we're like, we chose to be artists, and that there's like an importance to like, I mean, I'd have to say I bought that hook, line and sinker. Like I was in to the cult of theater. I was into the cult. I used to like walk around really believing like theater saves lives. I like believed that in my soul. And then this idea that because I was doing that important thing and choosing not to have maybe a 9-to-5 job or a job, any other field, right? And I recognized that it was this fear because if other people are happy not being artists and I'm unhappy being an artist, then the only way to hold on to that is because I believe that the artist's choice is like the holier choice.
Right.
That I'm making this sacred choice by being an artist. And so my unhappiness is justified. And I think for some people coming up against people who are living non-artistic lives and are really fulfilled by them, that can be like a jarring to the ego and to the identity in a way that affirms this sort of cult group mentality of we're artists, so we're better, and we choose art and we're choosing the harder path. And doesn't that make us like so great?
I mean, anytime you find yourself justifying your unhappiness at the expense of like how you view other people, I would say that that is a red flag for whatever that choice is that you're making, you know?
Absolutely. And really speaks to what you said too of like the taking a break. A lot of the actors that I talked about have done this taking a break. And in so doing, they could reevaluate what it is for them in their life now. You know, that the thing that they maybe idealized about it when they were 9 is maybe not what it's going to be at 30.
Yeah.
And so then what is the place for it in your life now? And then coming back and making that choice, there is an affirmation to that. There's power to that. There's a newfound love often for a lot of those people.
Totally. Do you really want to run your life based on the choices of a child? Like, would you let a
100%.
9-year-old make decisions for you? Because I wouldn't,
Right.
but I was. And now
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, now I'm an adult woman making these decisions for myself.
But wait, Lola, you just, I don't even know, like creature, goddess, wonder, I have to interrupt you.
Help me. I need some help.
And now it's time for listener questions.
I'm so scared.
This listener question is brought to you by Jeff Pride at Self Tapes Here. That's Jeff Pride at Self Tapes Here on Instagram. Jeff Pride is not only a fantastic booking actor, he is also an actor who books comedy, who books drama, he books commercials. He's a multifaceted, super talented, super supportive, knowledgeable, helpful collaborator. If you are looking for somebody to help you with your self-tape, whether that is in person in Los Angeles or over some streaming device, please contact him, get in touch with him. I truly do. I think he's fantastic at what he does. He has been helping people book jobs professionally for years. That's what he's been doing, and he is fantastic at it. Jeff Pride at Self Tapes Here on Instagram. If you have a listener question, please call 667-ACTOR-70. That's 667-ACTOR-70 for all your listener question needs.
Hi, Audrey. This is Teresa calling from Brooklyn. So my listener question for you is that after we have gotten our shit together, we have gotten some headshots, we have done the reel, and we finally are kind of getting more representation. I'm just curious, because I've asked for my first submission report for this month, how to bridge the gap between getting submitted by your agent and getting the audition. So even though I'm being submit, I'm not necessarily getting an audition, and I want to figure out how to close that gap so we can all be #booked and blessed. Thank you, Audrey.
I really appreciate this question. Thanks so much for calling this one in. You know, how do you get in the room for auditions is one of those super magical questions, because if I could answer that on a podcast, I think I could bottle it and sell it and be super rich. It's really about so many factors. This 10-year thing that people talk about, how it takes 10 years to build a career, I think so much of that 10 years is really about gathering a group of fans. So you have reps that are fans, you have casting directors that are fans, you have writers that are fans, producers. And honestly, when I think of so many of the auditions that I get now and so many of the jobs that I book, it really is, this showrunner that I met at a party 5 years ago from an actor friend who had me at a party. And then this showrunner and I saw each other at a few more parties and always talked. And then they have a show, and then my career got bigger and their career got bigger. And now I'm auditioning for their show. That's how it's done. And so it's not like a press this button and you too will cross the bridge between representation to auditions. I think if you're not getting auditions and you are being submitted, that says one of two things. Either your reps don't have powerful relationships to get you in, and or you don't have powerful relationships to get you in, and or your materials are still not sufficient. And you need to do some investigating to find out which of any or all of those is the case here. All right, I hope that's helpful.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
You talk about this in your podcast a lot. Like, what is the difference between passion and fanaticism? What's the difference between really loving something and committing yourself to it versus being in a high control group, not just with yourself, but in a community that is harboring that unhealthy relationship?
It's so hard because we ask this question all the time and there never is like a clear answer. It's absolutely a spectrum, but I would say that one of the number one things, can there be multiple number one
I like
things?
so
One
many
of the
number
biggest
ones.
things.
It's really important one, you guys. It's an important number one.
Multiple number ones. Is that if you are finding yourself believing that the thing that you are doing is the only way to do it, or the person who is teaching you is the only one who has the answers. It is great to be a part of a community. It's important to be part of communities. But when you join a community to the exclusion of influences that could potentially lead you to, casually question the one that you're in, that is where I would say the red flags lie. And then there are so many other versions of that. So the most like obvious one, and this is, a bit politically driven, but let's say you see something on the news that doesn't mesh with the way that you see the world. So your response to seeing that piece of news that conflicts with your belief system is to say it's fake news. Mm-hmm. That is a thought terminating cliche. It's a statement that you can say that's just sort of generic and will shut down critical thinking. And there are all kinds of versions of that.
I'd love to talk about some of the warning signs that maybe you're in a high control group. So let's frame for the listeners what a high control group is.
There are lots of different definitions. The one that I like is Steve Hassan. He has what's called the BITE model, and BITE stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control.
I just want to say that sounds like every acting class I've ever been in.
Really?
Oh my gosh, so much. Okay, so say it again. Say it again.
Behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control.
Yes.
There is no group that should have control over all of these areas of your life and that be healthy. Mm-hmm. And that can look like so many different things. But like if you are in a class that is for a specific craft, why would they need to control the information that you get about other things? Why would they need to control your behavior outside of when you're in that class specifically? That is what a high control group is.
Love this, because I want to give people some examples so that maybe in this thought of like, is my acting class a cult?
I'll talk to two different people who are members of the exact same group, and one of them was in a cult and one of them wasn't.
Oh, interesting.
It really depends on like what specific pocket you are in, who you are going to for your information, how isolated you are from the outside community. I know people who were in NXIVM and didn't have the extreme experience that some of the other women did because they just didn't get to that like inner circle.
Mm-hmm. Maybe this can help them see, or am I a cult member in an acting class, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that you have talked about on your podcast a lot is the importance of isolation and control through isolation. And it first makes me think about a lot of acting classes around Los Angeles. You're only allowed to take acting class at that school. They don't want you doing any other acting classes.
That's red flag.
That's a red flag, right? So no workshops, no comedy schools, no audition class, none of that. It's like, if you want any of those things, you have to ask for it within the school. And again, their justification, which I understand in like a logical part of my brain, is I don't want you getting mixed messages. I don't want you getting this thing from me and this other teacher saying another thing. And then you're confused as an actor. Like, I need some time with you to really like break through and have you sort of come through as an actor.
When your identity is being broken down and then rebuilt, they're creating conformity. They're eliminating critical thinking, because when you don't have an identity anymore, your identity becomes the group. And your decision-making is defer to the group. What does the group say? What does my leader say? Because you suddenly are losing connection with who you were before, what you valued before, what's important to you, who you even loved before. I mean, I can't speak to the culty acting group experience, but a lot of these groups, they want to limit your contact with people on the outside, which is always a red flag.
I will totally speak to that. A lot of them going home for the holidays, going on vacations is discouraged because it's seen as not, giving attention to your craft. I remember being told this story about an actress, Broadway or something, and her daughter died that day. And what she did is she went on stage that night because, the show must go on. And I remember thinking
Oof.
Yes, that's right. You do that because it's the art. And then now I'm or not, or you don't.
Yeah.
Or also maybe you do. It's fine. But my relationship to that notion has changed. It's not so sacred anymore that it's yes, you have to do that. It's more
right. If someone wants to go on stage, that's great. But listen, we got to take care of ourselves.
Right.
I mean, sacred is a good word because what you're describing really sounds like a religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's the thing that's higher than myself. It's when your needs no longer matter because you are serving this greater thing. That is a religion. And the tricky thing is that when you are so deep in a situation like that, it can be hard to tell whether or not it really is your choice. Because it can feel like your choice when you've been deprived of your critical thinking and you can't actually see any other options. But generally speaking, if you can't do something that you need to do, or you feel like you can't leave the group without being ostracized by your community, that is something to watch out for.
I love this because this reminds me of so many comedy schools. I know that your co-host had talked about the cult of comedy. When somebody wants to, not go to that comedy school anymore, it's this idea of again, you couldn't hack it, or your ego's too fragile, or whatever it is, right? And we so often praise people who, through all this trauma, they continue on in this professional pursuit, without any, snags or snares in it, as opposed to exactly what you're saying. A real camaraderie to me would sound like empathy, right? You talk a lot about that on your podcast. That sounds hard, or take a break. This school is literally not going anywhere. So it will be here for you if you change your mind.
Right. And one of the other things we talk about a lot is that it's great to join a group. Like I said, community is good, but we should all be diversifying as much as possible where we are getting our information from and where we are getting our techniques from. Whenever that is discouraged, that makes me very, very nervous because you're better off joining 5 cults, in my opinion, than you are joining one because you're not beholden to this single ideology, this closed-minded, again, isolated community. At least you're able to see what else is out there and see different information.
Yeah. I mean, controlling information is one of the things that you had said, right? And so if your teachers are telling you that school is maybe shitty because of that reason, or that technique is, old and done, or again, if they're holding themselves up to be the answer to acting and to working as an actor, then maybe that is something you should be reflective on.
Yeah. I remember I had taken a couple of meetings with a couple of managers, and one of them, he basically pitched himself to me as my potential manager. But the way that he did it was he said that I was so close to breaking through. And I was on the verge of having that special thing or whatever, but I just wasn't there. And the way to get there, he knew. He had the answer. He knew the way to get there. I have so much potential, but without him, can't do it. God. And I was almost tricked. And then I remembered my entire life. And I was this is not a good thing. I think I should maybe not work with this person. I'm so glad I didn't. But I see that happen a lot, where someone will present themselves as having this key to success and cutting you down just a little bit and making it seem like there is no alternative path in this industry where there literally is no one way to do anything. It's completely subjective. It's so random. Everyone's path is so different. I would be so wary of anyone who presents themselves that way or presents their school that way or presents their program that way, you know?
Yeah, presenting themselves as the savior, I think is such a red flag. And I just love how you frame that because that also sounds like almost every acting school I've ever been to. It is part of the seduction is this feeling that like, I have the answer. You're so close. I can't tell you the number of teachers who said you're on the precipice.
Ugh.
You're on the precipice. I see you. I see you. You're on the precipice of whatever it is, of this great career. And now on the side of the career that I'm on, which is like, I have a career, I can see like, you're always on the precipice. And you're also never on the precipice. You are working and you get some momentum and then you want to get to the precipice of the next place. And then you also feel like you'll never get there. Right. And that's sort of the lifestyle of the actor. On the scam episode we talked about love bombing, which is that, right? It's a tactic that people use. And in this particular situation, somebody had called in and said that they had done like a one-day workshop with somebody and that this person then called them afterwards and was like, listen, I'm calling you because you are really special and you're really, really good. And you just need this thing. And I think we could really get it going for you. And for $4.95 a month for the next 6 months, you can have a spot in my completely elite class that has no spots in it. And I will give you a spot and I will save you essentially.
Right. It's that combination of making you feel special and then giving you just a little bit of a backhanded compliment, just like giving you a little bit of insecurity and complex to make you feel like you need them.
And then this feeling of scarcity is part of it too, right? And so this particular actor said that then they showed up and felt so stupid because they found out that all these other actors there that day had gotten the exact same phone call. And again, I don't even know to what degree it's intentional all the time. A lot of them do believe, you talk about that all the time with cult leaders, like how many of them actually believe in what they're pushing and how many of them it's a scam, right? Yeah. Who knows? But I think a lot of them do think of themselves as the people who can solve your problem. And this person is really special and they are right there. But just because the intention is not necessarily awry doesn't mean that the action is in good faith.
Right. And I think that's a really important point too, because one of the things that you will hear a lot is like, well, I think they're really trying to do good, so they mustn't be fake, you know? But so much of the time, this kind of personality type really does think that they're doing good. But a lot of the time, it still stems from narcissism underneath it, because narcissists believe that they do have all of the answers and really are saving people, you know?
So we have behavior, information, and what were the other two?
Thoughts and emotion. And thought stopping, thought terminating cliches is a great way that happens.
Let's talk about that. So what's an example of that?
That's just your opinion, which I think is quite relevant in our political sphere at the moment. Amanda Montell, she was a guest on our show. She has a book called Cultish, which is all about the language of fanaticism. And she has some really great examples in there of all kinds of thought terminating cliches. And she even talks about Peloton, you know, how it becomes this like sort of obsessive. There's just like this jargon that sometimes is harmless and sometimes it just contributes to, you know, when I worked at Jamba Juice, my first job, we had Jamba Juice jargon, you know, and like it contributes to a community, or a feeling of company culture. Absolutely. But there is a certain point at which it becomes exclusionary and it's a way to signal that you are in the club. And people who don't know those terms are not in the club.
That makes a lot of sense to me also in terms of acting class, because each acting teacher has their own technique and their own language often. And sometimes I think there can be a superiority to the group mentality and the language that they're using. I remember in one instance, I used to use the term stakes, like, are your stakes really high? Meaning like, is this life or death in your scene? And then I was given another word, which was evaluation. Is the evaluation high? And I remember I would always sort of accidentally say stakes because I like knew that word. And then I was sort of like told, no, it's called evaluation. Like that's not.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And sort of conforming you to the technique that you're currently in. And I also know that happens a lot, I think, in improv schools and comedy schools. It's like, we're using this thing and you go about it this way. And I don't care that you've been to 7 years of comedy schools in that other school. Now you have to start at the bottom of our comedy school and start using our language and start using our methodology because it's our school.
Right. You can't say small anymore. You're saying tall now. Now that you're at Starbucks.
Oh my God, that's so real. You don't even understand, like, making you feel like you're doing something wrong by your behavior.
Yeah. A demand for purity is another thing to look out for. I feel like I'm just giving warnings.
No, I love it.
Everyone.
I love warnings. That's what I want everyone just to have context, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but again, it just comes back to the same thing ultimately, which is like, when it is being presented that this way is the only way, that is a problem. And demanding purity is part of that, not being free to question the person in charge when that's taboo or off limits. Anyone who is in a leadership position needs to be able to be questioned, or they're not a good leader. Like, you're not a good leader, because that is acting as though you don't make mistakes and you're infallible. I mean, I was just talking today to a woman for our podcast who was following a very popular social media spiritual leader. And as soon as she posted in a Facebook group being like, hey, isn't X practice doesn't that actually potentially re-traumatize people? She was immediately blocked and banned from the group. I mean, that is such a thing.
Yeah, I have had lots of experiences in, honestly, my acting education going all the way from like high school, where the acting teacher is like this godly person. And that if you're not agreeing with them or you're questioning them, then you're being recalcitrant. And that is a sign of being hostile and not being willing to learn and not being willing to grow.
It just feels so manipulative.
It is. It's so manipulative.
Like, I'm sure that there are cases where, sure, somebody is just being stubborn and not wanting to learn or whatever. Yeah. But like, anytime somebody questions to turn that into their own flaw, there are people with more experience, but there is no one who is an absolute authority in a creative profession. There just isn't.
But wait, Lola, you just, I don't even know, like creature, goddess, wonder, I have to interrupt you.
Help me. I need some help.
And now it's time for listener questions.
I'm so scared.
This listener question is brought to you by Carla Zuniga Hair on Instagram at Carla Zuniga Hair. Everybody's getting their haircut by Carla, and she is fantastic. She is easy to get in touch with. She replies quickly, which is great. And the haircuts that she gives are so precise. She puts a lot of thought into it. She goes, listen, I love this. She goes slow. She's not one of those people like, and then like, that's what you wanted, right? And you're like, no, that's never what I wanted. She's like, let's start like this. What do you think? How about here? Oh, a little bit shorter? Okay, how about here? Let's get you like comfortable with what this is. And I just think that is so great. I love her. She's a curl wizard. That's what my friends call her. Carla, the curl wizard. So if you have curly hair, definitely go to Carla. Carla on Instagram at Carla Zuniga Hair.
Hi, Audrey. My name is Ashlynn. I am listening from Los Angeles, California, and I just discovered the podcast this summer and have been binging it. I have a question that might be dumb, but I am looking to create my own reel, and I was wondering, can we use scenes from TV that have already aired? Like maybe even like 10 years ago was on TV? Because I actually have some scenes from an old acting class, but they're still like, they're evergreen. And I think it might be important to know that this is not anything iconic that nobody would even remember. Like one of the scenes that I'm looking at was from a show that lasted one season and like nobody even watched it. But there's a really good scene and a really good character. And then the other is like a procedural, and it's just like, you know, nobody would even remember the scene. Like it's not something that any famous actor or like is a known like scene that people would be like, oh, that girl didn't do that. I just didn't know if there was any rules about that, because it would go on my Actors Access or like casting, YouTube.
But yeah, before I shoot my reel, I was just wondering, are we allowed to do that? Thanks.
Yeah, I just love this question because what you've essentially said is I want to put 2 scenes on my reel that were so forgettable that no actors of note were doing the material, and then nobody would even watch it when it was airing. Can I have those scenes as my reel? And I just want to say, like, generally, copyright and stuff aside, not the best pitch for your personal, like, advertisement of how great you are. I just want to throw that out as something to consider. The next thing I want to say is, yeah, no, don't do that. Even if you think they're obscure, they're just not obscure. Casting directors' jobs is to watch everything. What always happens is it's like, this seems really familiar. Did they shoot this, or is this from that TV show that only aired that one season? I think it had some actors I don't quite remember in it, but I remember watching it. What is the name? And then it's done, and then your scene is done. And they spend all their time thinking about who was in it originally that wasn't you. So that is just a practical reason. Another reason is, so I really want you to think of it more like you are going to have a tasting. Here's like an amuse-bouche. Here's like a sampling of my greatest food that I can cook. I've got some food I cooked last week. I did it in a cooking class. I think it probably still holds up. And nobody wanted to eat it at the time. But I think it's solid. It's solid. And I was going to have you taste it to invest in my restaurant. Like you would never do that. So I would just say, what is the intention of this material? How good is the food going to look? How good is the food going to taste? To what degree are you going to spend time, energy, and money to give out a really great tasting menu for the investors to come in and drop a lot of time, money, and energy of their lives on you because they believe in you? So if you want great auditions and great reps because you believe you are a great actor, then you want your materials to be fucking amazing. You want them to be better than great. You want them to be outstanding. And just generally speaking, it's distracting. I would say, is there like a copyright law? I mean, so long as you're not trying to make money off of it, I don't think so. But it's not considered professional. If you have a scene that you've done as a self-tape, or you did it in a workshop, or you did something like that, and it's a self-tape, and your reps want this self-tape to be posted to show the work caliber that you're capable of, it's funny, like that I think is more understandable. Whether or not you personally want to use a self-tape as your tasting menu, that's up to you and your rep. That's something that you have to discuss with your representation. Lots of casting directors have lots of points of view on that. But in terms of like actually taking material that somebody else wrote and produced, and then taking their writing and then doing your own production of it and then putting that up as something that you've done, quote unquote, that is at the moment, spring 2022, it is not considered professional. Okay, I hope that's helpful.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
And then the last subject is emotional control. So what's an example of like emotional control? Because that to me seems like what acting is. Like it seems like acting is emotional control. And that's like hopefully by yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like you are managing your emotional control. But what is an example of somebody emotionally controlling you?
Well, love bombing is a great example of that.
Great. I love that.
Because inevitably that is going to produce feelings of euphoria in you when you're suddenly surrounded by this effusive community who is so welcoming and loving, and they just want to lavish attention upon you. That is a very early stage of emotional control. And then beyond that, I mean, I feel like so much of what we talked about falls under that category because like breaking someone's identity down and then rebuilding it, that is essentially hurting them to make them feel good again. I always think of, such an extreme example, and also it's television, but I always think of Homeland because he's being tortured. He's alone. He's, in this cell by himself and completely broken down, his identity completely broken down. And then his captor comes in and offers him some empathy and some kindness and some grace. So in that moment, he's complete, like, of course, you then are just so grateful that you're getting some kindness that you attach to that person. And like I said, extreme example, but like when somebody breaks you down to then build you back up, that is what that is.
I have to tell you, that is also like almost every acting class, because a big part of it is often getting actors to like a really emotional place where I don't even want to say a big part of it should be, but what my experience is getting an actor to a really emotional place by getting them to talk about something emotional or personalize it or something like that. And, or breaking down what is the reason that they're not working hard enough towards success, or they're not taking risks or whatever. And then they go into some sort of emotional experience of why they're doing that. And then when they're like totally destroyed and devastated, somebody actually just sent me a meme of exactly this. Then the teacher's like, great, now go from there. Right.
Right.
And then that's affirmed, I think, because, then you have an audience of people watching you go through that. And then you think like, yes, I just like acted and I did magic. And I think it's maybe kind of group therapy ? Without a therapist that's qualified. And then my experience is that a lot of those actors then can't translate that to an audition. They can't translate that to being prepared to get 7 pages of sides, work on those sides, tell the story of those sides, tape those sides, and send them out in 12 hours. That the breaking them down to build them back up is not necessarily translating to then the actual working and booking acting part of the career.
Oh, interesting. I mean, what you're describing sounds like literally like a NXIVM tactic that they used in that group. I mean, they would
a lot of actors in NXIVM. A lot of actors.
Exactly. They would basically like have them unload their trauma in front of a whole crowd of people because that was the only way to like then self-improve or whatever, which was supposed to somehow help their career. I mean, look, I'm sure that there's a version of it that is useful for acting, but it just makes me very nervous hearing about that.
I think it means that we as artists have to be aware of it, because I do think there are things about it that's useful. One of the things I can point to is being in voice class. Being really emotional and vulnerable in voice class allowed my voice teacher to be able to make sure that I was speaking from a safe place emotionally so that my voice isn't shredded while crying. Right. And so there was a need I felt to get to that very emotional, vulnerable place to then talk, because as people, we learn to not talk when we're emotional. And so the voice box and breath capacity gets really physically constricted through emotion. And so I can see lots of instances where that is valuable, getting you to be emotional and also not cover your face. Maybe if you're in theater, because a lot of times if we're emotional, we want to like put our hands over our face. We want to look down. Right. And so the practice of let's have you be emotional and now hold your head up so that an audience of 3,000 people can see you is maybe valuable practice. But that's not to say that there are times when I definitely can think that it was maybe more emotionally manipulative, or for a sense of the staff, teachers, whoever that is, to feel powerful and like getting you to transform rather than that actually being an applicable thing that you're doing that will improve your experience as an actor and make you work as an actor.
Right. The examples you described sound totally valid. I just would say trauma is a really tricky thing. Yeah. And if somebody is asking you to unload your trauma without for example, I talk about this nonstop lately. I've started EMDR therapy, which is where you essentially like reprocess your trauma in a new way. But one of the things that happens if it's a good therapist is that before you even start the reprocessing, you have to spend time building your emotional resources so that when you go to that traumatic place, you can safely come back, because otherwise it's risky and you can re-traumatize yourself. So playing in those fields can be very dangerous if it's not in responsible hands.
It really makes me think, honestly, in the same way that I think we have felt about a lot of things, our politicians, our law enforcement, our military, are all of these things that like, it's a heavy responsibility, these things. And there are some qualifications that would be good, and probably very helpful to the whole of the system and the people receiving those benefits and all of that. And it makes me think about, yes, if acting teachers are going to be qualified to be acting teachers, maybe a good part of that qualification should be an actual understanding of the cause and effect of trauma reliving, because it is a big part of what I do. A lot of what I do is trauma recall as an actor, so that I can get into a state so that I can then act a scene from a place that is personal.
Right.
But I'm in a lot of therapy for that reason. Because I'm aware that that is necessary for me, that in order to keep me emotionally fit and healthy, that all that trauma recall for the purpose of the character is maybe not going to be then helpful for Audrey's like day to day.
Right. Which all just comes back to, we have to also take care of ourselves.
Yeah. That's so wonderful. Well, this has just been, I think, so helpful. Honestly, I think we've come through a lot of really good flags for people to understand. And I just want to sort of clarify for everyone else, my intention for this episode is not to say your class is a cult or is not a cult, or your teacher is a cult leader. It's merely to say that we have a responsibility to have some awareness. And I think that we are a particularly vulnerable group of people. And I take that very seriously. And I want everyone just to listen to this and have some thought about, maybe that's not the best way that somebody could communicate that, or maybe that's manipulative. And I do believe like I could be in yoga and be really culty about it, or I could just go to yoga and I could get all the benefits out of yoga. Okay. I have some questions I end with. First of all, social media.
On Instagram, I am Oola Lola, OOHLALOLA. And on Twitter, I'm Ola Lola with only one O because I could not find a matching handle.
Wonderful. Okay, great. And my next question is, what is the best part about the business for you?
Best part about the business for me is that I get to use the experiences in my life that have been hurtful or painful or difficult and translate them into art and express that and get it out of my system. It is ultimately my best form of therapy.
Yeah, I love that. And then what is the worst part about this business and industry for you?
The worst part about this business is that I have to make money. And that's not that consistent.
Yeah. I'm ready to like societally be done with money. I'm like ready for us to like live out of it.
I agree.
Right? I'm ready for that like altruistic like Star Trek phase where they're like, money, what was that? Oh, it was a currency thing that they used to do. That seemed silly. Wasn't it just paper? It was.
It almost sounds like we should start a commune where money isn't a thing.
Doesn't matter. Isolate ourselves from everyone with our own values.
Yep.
Great. Love it. You and I can lead it. It'll be great. Okay. What do you wish somebody had taught you or managed to get you to understand when you were just a wee babe entering this industry back in the day?
I feel like I knew this intellectually, but I wish I had been able to really emotionally grasp that at every level I would be dissatisfied. And that at every level I would be like, well, sure, I got that, but I don't have that other thing. And that at the end of the day, the process has to be fulfilling, or there is just no point at the end of the road where happiness waits. It's just not there.
Yeah.
And I really was deep down convinced that it was,
Yeah, I talk a lot on the podcast of like, I had always put happiness ahead of once I hit this like career place.
Yeah.
I was like, once I get there, but it wasn't even through my own experience. It was through watching all my friends get there, quote unquote, there. And like, it wasn't better. Like nothing, like they had more
Yes.
money and that was
Yeah.
like great, but like they were very much the exact same person with the exact same sort of concerns in their lives.
Mhm.
And I remember being like, oh shit. Because I didn't know how to evaluate happiness if it wasn't based on the achievements that I was making.
I mean, I'm sure this has come up before on this podcast, but I just hear so many stories about people who win the Oscar and then the next day is the worst day of their lives.
Yeah. So
It's
depressed.
like, oh, what do I do now? I put all my stock into this, you know?
I guess I'll get another one. Sounds good. Goals are good. But wait, Lola, you just, I don't even know, like creature, goddess, wonder, you, I have to interrupt you.
Help me. I need some help.
And now it's time for listener questions.
I'm so scared.
This listener question is brought to you by Greg Saffel at Singing Lessons Los Angeles. That's Greg Saffel at singinglessonslosAngeles.com. I love the listener question last week about voice work. Oh, voice work. Sweet, beautiful, resonating tones. Round sounds. No, really, if you haven't seen Coda, I watched it after answering the last listener question. And then I was like, this is why we need voice lessons. There's a moment where she's with her teacher and she's getting her emotion out. And she's getting her emotion out on what's called full voice. And it is so beautiful and so powerful and such a beautiful example of the power of voice lessons. The breath work they're doing, that's breath capacity. That's what I'm talking about. Greg Saffel at singinglessonslosAngeles.com.
Hello, Audrey. This is Team from Los Angeles. I recently discovered your podcast on road trips, and I got obsessed very quickly. So I listened to so many episodes that I feel confident asking this question. So last year I got my package together, figured out my type. I filmed a monologue, filmed a bomb-ass tape because I was really tired of working commercially. I landed with my manager and my agent, and both explicitly told me they don't submit for co-stars. And just to preface this, I have 0 television credits, by the way. Now, we're officially a year in, but I haven't booked anything. I've been pinned twice for guest stars, and I had a producer session for a show as a regular, but I understand this is show business. So my question is, am I valid in feeling insecure about getting dropped because I haven't booked? Hopefully you get to this one, and thank you for answering if you do answer. And if you don't answer, thank you for giving knowledge to the community. Appreciate it.
Well, I just adore you, and I love this question so much. What I love about this question is it took lots of turns. It went lots of places. And what I didn't expect the question to be was, am I valid in my concern about being dropped by my representation? And I want to say to every actor, we're permanently valid in our concerns about being dropped by our representation. I just want everyone to know that doesn't go away. So for whatever it's worth, even the top of the top, it's not going to go away. However, I understand your particular concern in that if you're only auditioning for larger stuff and you're not booking any of that larger stuff, are you valid in the concern that because you're not booking anything that they're going to drop you? And they might. It's a business decision. Why can't I say decision? It's a business choice. And that business choice is about whether or not they believe that you are a valuable investment in the short term or the long term. Now, you can't know how long they're going to even keep pushing you. A lot of agents won't drop you. They'll just drop their push, I guess is a good way to say it. Like they'll drop pushing you hard. So you're kind of like informally dropped-ish. Listen, it sounds like you're doing great. Honestly, if you've been pinned twice and you've had a producer session for a pilot, if I were your reps, I would believe and know, and you should too, that the booking is around the corner. that said, there are plenty of people who have tested, X amount of times for pilots and booked nice roles that year. And then they woke up to their agent cutting them from the roster at the end of pilot season. That is very common. So it may happen. And if that's a concern that you have, you just have to remember that you tried to get rep before and you got it. And if you try to get rep again, you'll probably get reps again. And if this relationship doesn't work out, it doesn't mean you'll never find another good relationship or you're done working as an actor. It just means this relationship at this moment in time isn't going to go further. And for every actor who has lost representation, there is an actor who's lost representation, moved to the next agent afterwards, and then booked the job of a lifetime. So even if you get dropped, I just want to say there's a concern behind the concern of getting dropped. And that concern to me is really the thing that needs to be addressed, which is, then what do I do? Then I'm starting at ground zero. Then my career's over. Then what is that fear? And I would say that fear is probably unfounded because you've done the work to get to where you are and you'll do the work to get to where you need to be. All right. I hope that's helpful.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Okay, so my last thing is mildly interesting. This could be anything you've read, that you heard, that you know. Mildly interesting. I will start. My mildly interesting is actually the thing we talked about earlier in the podcast about how tyrants and cult leaders are the people that offer you solutions. And I think that's such a revelatory realization for me. And this guest.
Yes, Jonas Belcast, and the show is How to Become a Tyrant on Netflix.
How to Become a Tyrant, great. And what he said is think of the things that you're really passionate about. So if you're like passionate about pro-choice and you're passionate about ending homelessness and you're passionate about like abolishing school debt, and then somebody came along and was like pro-choice, homelessness solved, debt done, that you, of course, would be like, oh my God, I totally worship this person. They're amazing.
Right.
And just looking at it through that perspective also gives me a lot of empathy for the people that are susceptible to those organizations and ideologies that I think like, God, how could they even be thinking like that?
Right.
And it's like, oh, because it's offering them solutions that they deeply need.
Totally. Oh, I love those points you made.
Yeah.
I would say that my mildly interesting, which to me is wildly interesting, but to everyone else, probably mildly. Well, I'm reading the book everyone knows, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes.
Which I am reading because I had like a really, really bad bout of anxiety and panic for the first time in my life. And have had to get on antidepressants and the whole thing. Yeah. But it was initially triggered by a physical symptom that triggered some old fears. And I just really... I knew that there's a mind-body connection, but I did not know that there's literally like they are inseparable. It has been a whole journey. So I guess it's just generally that it's not just a generic thing that people say that stress really does hurt you. It really, really does. And your body is really, you have to attack the stress in your body and not just in your mind. That's my thing.
God, I love that. What a wonderful note to end on. You're like totally speaking my speech. And I think so relevant to everyone right now. And as we come out of the pandemic, there's going to be so much PTSD for, probably the rest of our lives. I mean, my grandparents, like they saved because of like the war, right? They're like, just like it changed them. The war and their experience of it changed them. And you're like totally speaking my experience with my own experience of anxiety and physical symptoms and all of that. And I think especially because we have a pandemic about physical dis-ease, then every physical thing that we feel can be so magnified of like, what's that? Right?
Whereas when I learned to not add a story to the sensation and just let it exist, I have found that it greatly decreases my discomfort and then stops the feedback loop. That's just one important lesson I have learned.
I just want to I want to woot woot you, like woot, 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 woot. Very good. Well, Lola, thank you so much for coming on. And I just really appreciate your time. And everyone, please go and check out your podcast. It is so great. I'm so excited for you. All the guests you've had on, I'm like, oh, you got that person. And oh, you got that person. I'm just like so thrilled for you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thanks so much. And thank you for having me. This has been great.
Next week on Audrey Helps Actors, we're getting into the industry, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to start talking to industry professionals on the other side of the camera. I really wanted to preamble Self-Tape May with what their experiences are, what their expectations are. So we are starting with an incredible young lady. She has been an agent assistant, a casting assistant. She's just been an assistant to all kinds of very important people. And she has a lot to say about how you treat assistants, that the assistants are watching you because they're asked to report back. So, be aware of that. And I just think it's such a great insider scoop episode of people that have a lot of eyes and ears out there. They're like the little birds all around, but they're like mighty little ravens. And they're like, caw, caw. They can claw you and say that you've been mean to them. So that's going to be a great episode. Thanks so much to Lola. Lola, you're incredible. Thank you so much for coming on. Everyone, listen to her podcast, the Trust Me podcast. It is so good. She co-hosts it with the wonderful Megan Elizabeth. That's Lola Blanc and Megan Elizabeth doing the Trust Me podcast, which is all about cults, extreme beliefs, and the abuse of power. This episode was mixed and mastered by Thomas Hank Snodgrass, produced and edited by Jesse Lumen. Still so handsome, everyone. It's been a hard couple of years, and I have to say, he's managed to get even handsomer, my beautiful husband. Show music by Ari De Niro and theme song by Alok Mehta and 108 Hill. All right, everybody, don't forget your towel. Even if it's a cult towel. Now maybe forget your cult towel. Just leave that towel at home.